I was sitting in that silent courtroom when my son's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "He's wasting my money," Evan declared, loud enough to echo off the wood-paneled walls. My money. He said it as if I were already gone, as if he were doing the world a favor by speeding up the paperwork that followed a death. I kept my eyes on the worn edge of the defense table. At 62, with a bad heart and a limp that came and went with the weather, I had imagined many moments of disappointment with my son, but never this. Never him dragging me into court while I was still alive, arguing that I was unfit to handle the home I built, the savings I worked for, the life I stood on shaking legs to protect. My ex-wife sat beside him, nodding as if she were the grief-stricken widow of a man not even dead yet. Evan's lawyer, polished suit, polished smile, flipped through papers like he was handling a routine eviction case rather than erasing the dignity of a living father. I stayed quiet. Then the judge, who hadn't truly met my eyes since we sat down, lifted a thin envelope from his clerk. "The court received this morning," he said. He tore it open, slid out a small USB drive, and frowned. His eyes sharpened in a way I had never seen on the bench before. "Counsel, this may change the course of these proceedings. But to understand what brought us to that moment, that frozen, breathless second, you have to go back to the beginning of that long, miserable morning. I woke up before sunrise, staring at the cracks in my bedroom ceiling. My doctor had warned me months earlier that stress could push my heart farther than it could tolerate. Yet nothing prepared me for the kind of pain that comes from your own child believing the world would be better off if you weren't in it. When I stepped outside, the cold air of North Willow bit at my lungs. I drove myself to the courthouse, hands trembling not from age but from the shame of what was about to unfold. I had lived in this town for 40 years, built a life, paid my dues, helped neighbors fix roofs after storms, buried friends, watched my kids play baseball in the summer heat. Yet that morning, I walked through those heavy courthouse doors feeling like a criminal. The place smelled of old carpet and stale coffee. I spotted Evan across the hallway instantly. 32 years old, well-dressed, well-groomed, arrogant as ever, and completely convinced that my home, my truck, my accounts, and even the land my father left me belonged to him already. He didn't greet me, didn't look ashamed. He whispered something to his mother and smirked. When the bailiff called our case, I felt every pair of eyes in the gallery shift toward us. Small towns don't need gossip. They create it out of silence. And this, a son taking his father to court while the man still breathed, was a buffet. We sat on opposite sides of the aisle, the distance between us wider than it had ever been. Evan's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "we're petitioning to have Mr. Malone declared incapable of managing his estate due to cognitive decline, irrational spending, and medical fragility. His behavior indicates he's no longer capable of responsible decision-making." I clenched my jaw. Cognitive decline? I'd passed every test my doctor gave me. I paid every bill on time. The only decline I had was emotional, the kind that comes from loving someone who stopped loving you back. Evan spoke next, not waiting for permission. He refuses to let us help him. He wastes money on pointless things and won't listen when we try to make him act responsibly. Everything he owns will fall into my hands eventually, but at the rate he's going, there won't be anything left. There it was again. Eventually. As if my heartbeat were just a ticking countdown to his payday. My ex-wife chimed in with her soft performative voice. "He's alone, confused. This is for his own good." The judge listened, flipping through thick folders filled with medical records, bank statements, and documents Evan had submitted. His expression didn't shift. Not until he opened that envelope. He slid the USB drive into his laptop, watched, paused, rewound, watched again. Then he straightened in his chair with a sharp inhale. "Everyone remain seated," he said. "This is serious." And in that instant, in that hush before the storm, I knew something had arrived that Evan wasn't prepared for. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the one who needed to be afraid. The moment the judge set the USB aside, the courtroom seemed to shrink. The walls felt closer, the air heavier, as if the entire building braced itself for whatever was coming next. But before the truth on that recording surfaced, I found myself drifting back to everything that had led us to this point. All the cracks in my relationship with Evan that I had ignored for too long. I remember the first time I noticed the shift in him. It was after my heart attack 2 years earlier. I'd barely opened my eyes in the hospital when Evan showed up, not with flowers or concern, but with a clipboard. A clipboard. He started asking about passwords, insurance beneficiaries, the deed to the house. I told myself he was just worried, just panicked, just trying to be responsible. But then the comments started. "You shouldn't be living alone anymore. You don't need that truck, Dad. Sell it. You're too old to keep up with the house. Let me take over." Every sentence sounded like concern wrapped in control. At first, I brushed it off, hoping it was just his fear talking. But fear usually brings people closer to you, not closer to your belongings. By the time I recovered enough to go back home, the change was undeniable. He looked around my house the way people inspect a property they might buy. He commented on the furniture, the tools in the garage, the land behind the house. He asked if I thought about the future, his future, not mine. I didn't want to believe my own son could see me as an inconvenience, as someone in the way. So I did what fathers do. I made excuses for him. It's stress, I told myself. He's worried, he means well. But good intentions don't break into your house. Good intentions don't put words in a petition claiming you're mentally unfit. And good intentions don't drag you into a courtroom before you're even in the ground. That morning, when I walked into the courthouse lobby, I saw all the signs I had ignored reflected back at me in the worst way. Evan stood tall, confident, with a new leather briefcase and a silver watch I knew he couldn't afford without dipping into something he shouldn't. He barely looked up when I arrived, as if I were a stranger interrupting his day. "Dad," he said flatly. No warmth, no hesitation, just a cold acknowledgement. My ex-wife Marlene stood beside him. We hadn't spoken in years except through holiday cards and occasional updates from our daughter Marianne. As soon as she saw me, she put on that pitying smile she always used when she wanted to look like the victim. "Richard," she said softly, stepping closer. "We're just trying to help you. Help me." Funny how help always seems to involve losing everything you own. Evan placed a hand on her arm as if to say, "I've got this." The gesture was so rehearsed, so performative, that it made my stomach churn. He looked at me the way people look at something they're tired of dealing with. A chore, a burden. "We're only doing what's necessary," he said. "You left us no choice. No choice." As if filing for control of my estate was the natural next step after a father insists on living his own life. When the bailiff finally opened the doors to the courtroom, I followed the three of them in, trailing behind like a ghost at my own funeral. They sat together, a neat little trio. I sat alone on the opposite side, the distance between us filled with years of unspoken resentment and things none of us were brave enough to confront. As the lawyer started speaking, laying out the accusations like a polished script, I felt something inside me finally break free. Not anger, not even sadness. Clarity. Evan never wanted to understand me. He wanted to manage me. He didn't want to know how I was feeling. He wanted to know what I still had left to give. He wasn't trying to protect my future. He was trying to secure his. Every word they threw at me, senile, confused, financially irresponsible, was less about who I was and more about who they wanted me to be, powerless. But as the judge reviewed that USB, as the room held its breath, as Evan shifted anxiously in his seat for the first time that morning, I could feel the balance finally tipping. For months I'd been alone in this fight. Too embarrassed to tell friends, too ashamed to admit that my own son was trying to bury me before my time. But seeing the judge's brows knit together, seeing his posture straighten, seeing him pause the video and stare at Evan, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone. Something on that recording, something Evan never expected to surface, had finally given me a voice louder than his accusations. And whatever the judge had just watched, it was about to turn this entire case upside down. The judge's silence after watching the recording was louder than any gavel strike. His eyes lingered on the paused frame on the laptop screen, and even from across the courtroom, I could see what it showed. Evan inside my house, rummaging through drawers with frantic hands and a face twisted in irritation. He hadn't even bothered to turn off the lights when he left that day, or lock the door. The judge finally leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mr. Malone," he said slowly, turning to Evan, "would you care to explain why you were searching through your father's private belongings in his absence?" Evan blinked rapidly, caught between arrogance and panic. I was checking on him," he stammered, "making sure the house was safe. He forgets things sometimes. He leaves things unlocked." The judge paused the video, tapped the spacebar, and let it play again. This time Evan's voice filled the courtroom speakers. "Come on. Where does he hide it?" More rustling. The sound of a drawer slamming. "God, this old man is dragging this out. If he doesn't die soon, there'll be nothing left." Marlene gasped softly, covering her mouth with both hands. His lawyer's face drained of color. A murmur rippled across the courtroom like a wave of disbelief. I didn't move. For a moment, Evan just sat there, frozen, wide-eyed, like a man watching his own execution in slow motion. "That is your voice, is it not?" the judge asked. Evan swallowed hard. "Your Honor, that's taken out of context." "In what context?" the judge interrupted sharply. "Is hoping for your father's death appropriate?" Evan had no answer. His jaw clenched. His chest rose and fell in short, panicked breaths. He looked over at me, actually looked at me, for the first time since this nightmare began. But instead of regret, I saw something else in his eyes. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing access to what I could give him. His lawyer scrambled to recover. "Your Honor, my client was under emotional stress. He didn't mean. The judge raised a hand to silence him. I've heard enough. He turned to me then, and for the first time since I'd entered that room, he addressed me with something close to respect. Mr. Richard Malone, he said, do you wish to respond to the claims regarding your mental stability and financial capacity? I stood slowly. My knees cracked the way old knees do, but my voice, when I found it, was calm. Your Honor, I said, I may walk a little slower than I used to, but my mind is sharper than ever. I've passed every evaluation my doctor put me through. I pay my bills on time. I manage my accounts myself, and every decision I make is my own. I glanced at Evan. He looked away. As for the money, I continued, the only person wasting anything here is the one trying to steal from a man who hasn't even taken his last breath. A heavy silence followed. The judge nodded once firmly. Thank you, Mr. Malone. Evan's composure cracked. Dad, why would you say that? He blurted out, half angry, half pleading. Because it's the truth, I said simply. He pushed up from his chair. I'm trying to help you. You're too stubborn to admit you need someone to manage things for you. I met his eyes. You're not trying to help me. You're trying to control what I own. He hesitated, just long enough to confirm the truth. The judge tapped the desk lightly. Mr. Evan Malone, sit down. Now. Evan slumped into his seat, shoulders collapsing inward. The arrogance he walked in with had evaporated, replaced by a pale, shaking version of the son I once held in my arms. The judge reviewed the rest of the documents in silence. My medical evaluations, my bank statements, my letters from doctors confirming my capacity. Each page he turned was a nail in the coffin of Evan's case. Finally, he closed the folder and looked up. I find no evidence, he said, that Mr. Richard Malone is incapable of managing his affairs. In fact, the recording provided reveals something quite different, an attempt by the petitioner to undermine his father's autonomy for personal financial gain. Evan's lawyer lowered his head. Marlene began to cry quietly. The judge wasn't done. This court does not exist to facilitate theft under the guise of concern. Evan's face flushed red, then white, then something in between. His hands twisted together as if he were fighting the urge to argue, but the weight of the recording hung over him like a verdict before the verdict. I felt a strange mix of emotions tighten in my chest, hurt, relief, anger, grief. Not because the judge was siding with me, but because it had taken a stranger and a hidden camera to reveal the truth about my own son. And as the judge prepared to deliver the official ruling, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Even if I won the case, I had already lost something far more painful. The son I thought I had was gone. The judge's ruling wasn't even spoken yet, but the atmosphere inside that courtroom had already shifted. You could feel it, like the pressure drop right before a storm breaks open. Evan sat rigid, staring at the grain of the wooden table as if it might somehow offer him a way out. Marlene dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though it was hard to tell whether she cried for him or for herself. I didn't move, not because I felt victorious, but because all the strength I had left was holding back the weight of the moment. I had imagined 1,000 versions of this day, arguments, accusations, maybe even apologies, but never this. The truth laid bare not by my voice, but by a hidden recording delivered by someone who cared more about my well-being than my own blood. The judge folded his hands and exhaled slowly. Before I deliver my final decision, he said, I want to understand the circumstances surrounding this recording. He turned to me. Mr. Malone, did you request anyone to monitor your home or record your son's actions? No, Your Honor, I answered. I had no idea any of this existed. Then how did this evidence come to reach the court? I swallowed. My neighbor, Donna Pierce, must have submitted it. She checks on the property when I'm hospitalized. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Your neighbor seems to have a high regard for you. Higher than my own son has had in years, I said under my breath. But Evan heard it. He flinched like the words had struck him physically. The judge turned toward him again. Mr. Malone, do you dispute the authenticity of this video? No, Evan muttered, rubbing his forehead. But you don't understand what it's been like. He's been getting worse, forgetting things, making questionable decisions. What questionable decisions? The judge asked. Evan hesitated. For the first time since this hearing began, he had run out of rehearsed lines. He bought things he didn't need, Evan managed. New tools, repairs to the house, a new water heater when the old one still worked. He spent money on the yard, on getting a fence fixed, on medical bills. Medical bills? The judge repeated, eyebrows lifting. Is this what you consider evidence of incompetence? Evan's mouth opened, then closed again. The judge's tone hardened, just barely. Your father has the right to maintain his home, his health, and his dignity. Nothing in your testimony suggests incapacity. He's living like he expects to die, Evan blurted suddenly. He's acting like time's running out. And what happens when he makes a mistake? What happens to everything? He has no plan. I do have a plan, I said quietly. All eyes turned toward me. I hadn't intended to speak, but something inside me, the part of me that had stayed silent for too long, rose to the surface. My plan, I continued, was to live my life until I couldn't anymore, to spend money on fixing the house I love, to repair things while I still have the strength to do it, to leave behind something that actually works, not a broken shell. Evan stared at me, stunned. And yes, I added, I expected time to be shorter. You would too, if a doctor told you to take your days one at a time. A deep silence filled the room, thick with the things none of us had said for years. Marlene wiped her tears again, but I could see the regret in her posture. Maybe not regret for supporting Evan's scheme, but regret that this ugly truth had come out in public, where it couldn't be controlled. The judge cleared his throat and resumed. The video demonstrates intent. Intent to seize control of your father's property before any legal basis existed. That is deeply concerning. Evan's lawyer shifted uneasily. Your Honor, my client was misguided, not malicious. The judge raised an eyebrow. Misguided doesn't explain wishing for a parent's death. The words hit the room like thunder. Evan buried his face in his hands. For once he didn't have an excuse ready. And I felt something inside me crack. Not break completely, but crack in a way that could never be repaired. I remembered holding him as a newborn. I remembered teaching him to ride a bicycle. I remembered cheering at his high school graduation, thinking he would grow into a good man. How do you reconcile the boy you once lifted onto your shoulders with the man hoping you die sooner so he could claim what wasn't his yet? The judge looked between us, and his expression softened, just slightly. Mr. Richard Malone, he said to me, I understand this must be difficult. I nodded but didn't trust myself to speak. This court, he continued, is not blind to the emotional damage brought forward today. But the issue before us is strictly legal. And legally, there is no evidence, none, that you are unfit to manage your affairs. He looked at Evan with a level gaze. You may be concerned about your father's health. You may be grieving the changes time brings. But you took steps that were not protective. They were predatory. Evan stiffened as if struck. The judge wasn't finished. You broke into his house. You rifled through his private belongings. And you expressed a wish for his death. Whether you said it out of frustration or entitlement is irrelevant. The intent is clear. The room felt colder. Marlene whispered, Evan, why would you? Evan didn't answer. The judge closed his folder calmly. Given the evidence provided, I am inclined toward a firm ruling. However, before the final verdict, I want to consider the impact of this recording and ensure all classified documentation, medical or otherwise, is properly understood. He gestured to the bailiff. We will take a 30-minute recess. His gavel struck once, sharp, resonant, final. I remained seated for a few seconds after everyone else stood. Not because I was weak, but because I didn't know how to stand in the middle of a moment like this, where truth had finally emerged, but everything hurt more than ever. As I rose, Evan's chair scraped loudly against the floor. He stood pale and trembling. Dad, he said, voice cracking. Please, you know I didn't mean. I looked directly at him. For once, I said, I'm listening. Say something that isn't a lie. His lips parted. No sound came out. Marlene grabbed his arm. Not here, Evan, she whispered sharply. Not now. He pulled away from her, guilt warping his face into something almost unrecognizable. The bailiff motioned for us to exit the courtroom. People in the gallery watched us as if witnessing a tragedy unfold in real time. I stepped into the hallway, a long echoing space lined with portraits of judges long dead. The floor beneath my shoes felt uneven, not because of age, but because life itself had tilted. The door behind me clicked shut. For the first time in years, Evan didn't walk ahead of me or beside me. He stayed behind alone, staring at the carpet as if it held answers he'd never bothered to look for before. And I, standing there in silence, realized something. This hearing might decide who legally owns my property, but the words on that recording had already decided something far deeper, whether my son still had a place inside my life. When the recess ended, the bailiff's voice echoed down the hallway. Court is back in session. I took a breath. One steady inhale, two slow exhales, the same way the doctor had taught me after the heart attack. Evan stood several feet away, hands buried in his pockets, his body folded inward like he was trying to hide inside himself. He didn't meet my eyes as we walked back into the courtroom. Marlene followed behind him, stiff as a statue, her heels clicking on the polished floor with a sharpness that did not match the trembling in her hands. Inside, the judge had returned to the bench with a new sense of deliberation. It wasn't anger. Judges rarely show that. But something firmer, something resolute. The recording had removed any room for interpretation. Everyone took their seats. Everyone except the judge, who remained standing for a moment, adjusting his glasses as he studied the papers before him. Finally, he spoke. This court has reviewed all evidence provided, he began. Financial statements, medical evaluations, testimony from both parties, and the recently submitted recording. He looked up, first at me, then at Evan. What we have before us, he continued, is not simply a matter of estate management. It is a matter of trust, broken trust. Those last two words landed like stones. The judge sat slowly, folding his hands on the bench. I want to speak plainly, he said, because today's case is emotionally charged and deserves clarity. He turned to me. Mr. Richard Malone, your medical records confirm you are fully capable of managing your own affairs. There is no legal basis to remove your autonomy, your rights, or your property. I nodded once. My throat tightened despite myself. The judge shifted his attention to Evan. Mr. Evan Malone, he said, tone steady but unyielding. Your actions, as evidenced by the recording, demonstrate an attempt to gain control over your father's estate before any appropriate legal circumstance existed. Evan swallowed. Your Honor. No, the judge said sharply. I am not finished. Silence fell thick as snowfall. You entered your father's home without consent. You searched through his private belongings. You spoke words that no son should ever utter, much less act upon. Marlene raised a hand to her mouth, trying and failing to hold back another tremor. Furthermore, the judge continued, your claims regarding your father's mental decline are unsupported. They appear motivated not by concern but by personal interest. Evan's eyes widened with something between anger and humiliation. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch. For these reasons, the judge declared, this court rules in favor of Mr. Richard Malone. Full ownership and decision-making authority of the property, assets, and estate remain solely with him. The petition for guardianship and financial control is dismissed. The gavel struck once, final, but the judge didn't stand. He rested his hands against the bench and leaned forward slightly. In addition, he said, voice softening but never losing authority, I must address the human side of this case. Evan looked up, hope flickering for a fraction of a second. Families, the judge said, are not immune to conflict, to aging, to fear, to misunderstandings. He shifted his gaze to me, then to Evan. I see a father who has worked hard, lived independently, and tried to maintain dignity despite the challenges of age. And I see a son who, he paused, choosing words carefully, has allowed fear and entitlement to cloud his judgment. Evan flinched again, this time harder. I will not dictate how you repair this relationship, the judge said, but I strongly advise each of you to reflect on what has been revealed here today. He tapped the bench gently with his fingertips. This concludes the ruling. Court dismissed. Another strike of the gavel. The room sprang to life. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, whispers erupted. But for me, everything felt muted, like I was watching it from behind glass. I stood slowly, my hands steady, but my heart heavier than I expected. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Just hollow. Evan remained seated, staring at the floor as if he couldn't lift his head under the weight of what he had just lost. Not property, but self-respect. Marlene leaned toward him. Evan, she whispered, her voice cracking. He shook her off. I turned to walk toward the exit, needing fresh air more than anything else. As I reached the double doors, I heard footsteps behind me. Hurried, uneven. Dad, wait. I stopped but didn't turn immediately. When I finally did, Evan was standing a few feet away, chest tight with shame, desperation flickering in his eyes. I didn't mean for things to go this far, he said quietly. I thought you were slipping. I thought you were dying. I held his gaze for a long moment. And you thought rushing the process would fix that? I asked. He winced as if I'd struck him. No, you were pushing me out. You wouldn't tell me anything. You kept making decisions without us. Without you, I corrected. Your sister never tried to take what I have. She never pressured me. You did. Evan's face flushed again. I just didn't want to lose everything when you... He stopped himself. I finished the sentence for him. When I die. He looked away. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Evan, losing me was never the danger. Losing yourself. That's what you should have been worried about. He blinked rapidly, tears forming, but he fought them back with the same stubbornness he inherited from me. I don't expect forgiveness today, he murmured. But Dad, I'm sorry. For the video, for the petition, for everything. For the first time since this began, his voice sounded honest, not calculated, not rehearsed, not manipulative, just broken. I studied him carefully. The man he'd become, the boy he'd once been, the lines of confusion and fear that had carved themselves into his face. I need time, I said simply. More time than you gave me before dragging me into this courtroom. He nodded slowly. His shoulders dropped and something like defeat, no humility, settled over him. I'll wait, he said. I started to walk away, then paused. You know, I said without turning around, you don't inherit a house by forcing its owner out. You inherit it by being someone worth leaving it to. He didn't reply, but I heard his breath hitch. Outside, the autumn sun had dipped behind the clouds, leaving the courthouse steps bathed in a cold, pale light. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with crisp air that stung in a strangely comforting way. Marlene eventually exited behind me, her eyes red and distant. She didn't say a word, just gave me a fragile nod before heading toward Evan's car. I stood there a long time after they drove away, feeling the wind brush over me like a quiet reminder that I was still here, alive, breathing, standing on my own 2 feet despite everything. The fight wasn't over. The wounds weren't healed. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had reclaimed something I had lost long before this courtroom battle, my place in my own life. The courthouse parking lot was nearly empty by the time I gathered the strength to leave. A faint breeze drifted across the asphalt, carrying the rustle of dry leaves from the oak tree near the entrance. The world around me looked the same as it had that morning, but inside, everything had shifted. The truth had ripped through the lies that held my family together, leaving nothing but scattered pieces. I took slow steps toward my truck, my knees aching the way they always did after long days. When I opened the door, I paused and glanced back at the courthouse, its red bricks glowing under the muted afternoon sun. That building had witnessed the most painful confrontation of my life. It had also witnessed something else. The moment I stopped being a man whose son tried to bury him alive and became a man who refused to be erased. I didn't go home right away. I drove slowly through North Willow, the town that had raised me, bruised me, and anchored me all at once. I passed the hardware store where I taught Evan how to use a hammer, the little park where I had pushed him on the swings until he begged me to stop, the barbershop where he'd gotten his first haircut and cried the whole time. Memories followed me like ghosts, but behind each memory stood another. The recording, his voice, his words. If he doesn't die soon. It was strange, realizing the person who once saw you as a hero could eventually see you as an obstacle. But as I turned onto my street, something settled quietly inside me, something I hadn't felt in months. Resolve, the kind you earn, the kind that hurts. When I pulled into my driveway, Donna Pierce, the neighbor who had saved me without knowing it, was watering her ferns on her porch. She waved, her eyes narrowing with worry. "You okay, Richard?" she called. "As okay as a man can be," I answered. Donna approached slowly, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. I didn't want to send that video at first. I felt like I was interfering. But when I heard what he said, I just couldn't let him do that to you. I swallowed a knot in my throat. "You did the right thing, Donna. I wish my own son had protected me half as much," she sighed. Blood doesn't always mean loyalty. No, it didn't. And sometimes loyalty came from unexpected corners. Inside the house, everything was exactly as I'd left it. My boots by the door. My tools lined up neatly in the garage. The old framed pictures of Evan and Marianne on the mantle. I stared at Evan's photo. A teenage boy with a baseball cap crooked on his head and a grin wide enough to touch the edges of the frame. Where had that boy gone? And how had the man he became drifted so far? I sat in my recliner, the leather creaking beneath me. The room felt both too small and too empty. For a long time I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't cry. I just breathed, because breathing was something I still owned. As evening settled over the house, the doorbell rang, softly at first, then again. I pushed myself up, half expecting Donna, maybe Marianne. But when I opened the door, Evan stood on the porch, hands stuffed nervously in his pockets, shoulders slumped. "Dad," he said. His voice was fragile, like something that might shatter if he raised it. I didn't respond. I simply stepped aside. He entered cautiously, as if expecting the house to reject him the way I almost did. He walked to the living room and paused when he saw his childhood photo on the mantle. "I used to love that picture," he said quietly. "I don't know when I stopped seeing that kid." "You tell me," I replied. He sat down slowly. I stayed standing. The space between us felt like a canyon carved by years of silence and things unsaid. "I was scared," he confessed. "That's the truth. When you got sick, when the doctor said your heart was failing, I panicked. I kept imagining what would happen if you weren't around anymore, how everything would fall apart, how I'd have to handle everything alone." "You wouldn't have been alone," I said. "You have a sister. You have me still." He grimaced. "I know, but it felt like everything was slipping through my fingers. And then I started thinking about the house, the money, the land. I told myself I was protecting the family, protecting the future." He shook his head. "But really, I was thinking about myself. Only myself. I didn't soften. Not yet." "And breaking into my house?" I asked. "Going through my things?" His voice cracked. "I was desperate and angry and stupid." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "That recording," he whispered, hearing myself say those words. I didn't even recognize that voice. I sounded like someone who hated you. "But I don't, Dad. I swear I don't." I let his words sit in the air for a long moment. "You don't have to hate someone to hurt them," I said finally. He bowed his head. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to try again, to be someone you can trust." The truth was, I had wanted to hear those words for a long time, maybe too long. But an apology isn't a magic key. It doesn't unlock every door, it doesn't erase the damage, but it does open a window, maybe just enough to let light in. You want to earn my trust? I asked. He nodded. Then start by showing up, not for my things, for me. He exhaled shakily. I can do that. I studied him. This grown man, trembling like the child he once was, but stripped of the arrogance that had once wrapped him like armor. Then we'll take it slow, I said, very slow. He nodded again. Relief washed over his face, but not the kind that comes from victory. Rather the kind that comes from not losing everything. We talked for a while. Not about the will. Not about property. Not about what had happened in that courtroom. We talked about real things. Small things. Human things. When he left, he hugged me. Awkward, tentative, but real. And after he drove away, I sat alone again in the quiet house. This time, though, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a beginning. Not the bright kind, not the easy kind, but a beginning carved out of truth. The house creaked as the wind picked up outside, and I imagined my late wife standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, saying with that soft smile of hers, "Took you both long enough." Maybe she was right. As the night deepened, I walked to the porch and looked across the yard. The same ground Evan had once seen as an inheritance waiting to be collected now felt like something else entirely. A place where a father and a son might plant something new, something fragile, something worth saving. And as the stars began to peek through the clouds, I realized something important. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, but it also doesn't erase the possibility of redemption. My son had tried to take everything from me, but he had also taken the first step back. Forgiveness would be a long road, but at least now, for the first time in years, we are walking in the same direction. If this story resonated with you, don't leave in silence. Comment below, even anonymously, if you've ever faced a painful family conflict or a moment of truth like this. Like the video to help more people find these stories, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful life stories every week. You're not alone, and your voice matters.